The Kidnapped Bride. This is a love story of a Christian groom searching for his kidnapped Dinka bride. She was abducted from South Sudan by the Muslim invaders, brought to the Darfur region, and sold as a slave. It was written in English and translated into Arabic by Dr. A. Ahmed. Copyright. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review for print in a newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. All the characters in this book are fictitious, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Chapter 46. Another slave trader was implicated in the slavery trial. By the time the newly wedded couple, Malwal and Olivia, returned to the courtroom, the Southern lawyer had reached the end of the unpleasant confrontation between the Muslim Mujahideen Arab Janjaweed and the Sudanese Robin Hood Wade Mahira bint Aboud and his Hambata bandits. The audience and the judge are amazed, listening to his narration as if they were watching a horror movie. Wad Mahira killed some of the bad guys from the Janjaweed and captured Ayan and the rest of the kidnapped Dinka girls. In addition, he took from them the livestock that they had stolen from the south. Fate transferred the captive Dinka girl from the hands of the notorious Mujahideen Muslim raiders and killers to the grip of another, more evil and dangerous Muslim man, Satan Wad Mahira bint Aboud. The same evil, lawless, bloodthirsty Hambati man brought her to the brothels owned and operated by Bint al-Zubair Pasha and sold her to her as a prostitute and sex slave. On the same day, the stolen Dinka girl was tied up, beaten, raped, and her body burned with a hot iron rod by the evil pimp. She was gang-raped by several other men among her clients who are willing to pay money in prostitution for fucking her helpless prostitutes. Then the daughter of Satan Pasha made between Ayan's breasts the Islamic crescent a sign of slavery as if she were a commodity for sale. The freed Dinka girl, Ikalaz, had shown the perpetual Islamic crescent tattoo on her naked body to my wife, Mary, in the bathroom of our residence. My beloved Christian wife, Mary Akal, is sitting there, and if the court needs her testimony, she is ready to provide it. Everyone looked at Mrs. Akal, who was sitting near Ikalaz. When the judge did not ask for the testimony of the Southern wife, her Christian husband continued to speak. The evil woman, sitting in this hall, used a hot rod to make another permanent tattoo around the pussy of Ayan after shaving her black pubic hair from it. She does this to the girls who were sold to her as slaves by the Hambati man Wad Mahira bint Aboud and other Arab Janjaweed, which is exactly what her evil great-grandfather al-Zubair Pasha Wad Rama did. The so-called great hero in Sudanese history, who used to do that tattoo on the naked bodies of our stolen African young women in the past. The Southern lawyer expected that the judge or one of the other listeners would challenge him on his performative opinions about al-Zubair Pasha. When no one challenged or condemned him, he continued his story. In less than a month, my client Ikalaz was subjected to rape and forced sex acts by more than 300 men. She also told me that in her first week, she had to have sex with more than 30 men per day. Once again, Mr. Akal exaggerated his numbers with the intention of increasing the anger of the judge, the jurymen, and perhaps even the public, so that Bint Zubair Pasha could either be hanged to death or sentenced to maximum imprisonment and, as he hoped, killed inside the courtroom by the angry African public in vigilante justice. For this reason, she pushed my client Ayan to the point of contemplating suicide by burning her pure body, which is being violated and desecrated every day by dozens of men. After torturing her psychologically and physically and earning a lot of money by selling her body into prostitution, the daughter of al-Zubair Satan Pasha came out with the drama of Abdullah Dang and his Christian daughter, Suzanne. Any good girl in my client's place would have chosen the imam's house over brothels. Al-Zubair's daughter threatened Ayan before sending her to the imam's house. She told her that her dangerous gangsters would be sent to watch Malana's house, and if she tried to escape, these evil men would catch her and take her back to her brothels, slavery, and liquor bars. Mr. Akal stopped talking and looked at Bint al-Zubair. Before he could make an unpleasant remark or carry out the punishment he thought she deserved, the judge intervened. Please, Mr. Akal, remember what I told you a few minutes ago. Inappropriate comments or rude remarks against the accused are not allowed in this court. Tell us what your client, the Southern girl, Ikalaz, told you, and leave the matter to the court to decide. Mr. Akal said, raising his hands in a plea, I seek refuge in God from the old devil who sits in this hall with his obese, adulterous woman, who also resembles the wife of the Antichrist. The judge did not know whether to consider this a supplication to God, an observation, or a curse on the accused. For this reason, he said, O God, give my soul more days before he becomes silent again. The Southern lawyer continued, my client was trapped like a slave inside the house of the adulterous imam. She worked every day as an unpaid maid from sunrise until sunset, and at night she was raped by an old, dirty man who was older than her grandfather. She no longer has a home or family in Sudan. The cursed Muslim Arab Janjaweed wiped out her entire family and killed other villagers from the Dinka tribe, including women, children, and the elderly. If she had escaped from the house of Satan and gone to the detention camp for Southern Christian refugees in the city of Babanusa, we all know what would have happened to her. The Arab Janjaweed might raid the refugee camp, kill her or kidnap her again, enslave her, gang rape her, and then sell her as a prostitute or slave to work for free on the slave farms. Once again, the judge did not understand the phrase, the house of Satan, whether it was an insult to the accused imam or an attack on the daughter of Al-Zubair Pasha, so he prayed another prayer for patience. There is no objection to your ruling, O God, and I ask you, Mr. Akal, to quickly present your defense and try to be brief and avoid unnecessary details, observations, and sarcasm. I'm done with my defense, Mr. Akal said quickly. He only added his advice to the court. I ask this court to impose the maximum punishment on the cursed devil, Maulana Abd Iblis al-Mahdi, and on the former prostitute who herself turned into a pimp and slave trader, the daughter of Satan Pasha. Before the judge could disqualify him or remove him from the courtroom, Mr. Akal reached his seat with one long step and sat down next to his wife, Mary and Ikalaz. Is there anything the suspect's lawyer wants to say to the court? It is clear that the length of this case negatively affects the judge's psychology. He's tired of the whole thing and wants to get it over with and give his final judgment. Maulana's Muslim lawyer said as he sat down, Yes, Your Honor. Everything that the Christian lawyer, Mr. Akal, narrated to the court had nothing to do with the defendant. The accused, the blessed Maulana Sheikh Abdul Razak, the great-grandson of Imam Muhammad Ahmed al-Mahdi, is innocent of responsibility for the crimes of slavery and prostitution committed against the Southern girl, Ikalaz. He is innocent, just as the wolf was innocent of the blood of our prophet Joseph, son of Jacob, the father of Bani Israel. He was deceived by a suspected woman sitting in this courtroom. The court is going to decide that, not you, the judge said. Then His Majesty turned to one of the jurors and whispered some words in his ear. Before he could convey the same secret to the other jurors, he heard someone screaming in the courtroom. Malal, who got back to his feet, shouted, Your Honor, the judge, I have something to add to those heinous crimes committed against my Dinka wife, Ayan Majak. The judge was amazed at his boldness and did not know whether to tell him to speak or to be silent. There is another culprit in this conspiracy against my wife Ayan, who should be brought to justice and punished for his heinous crime. Who is that person? Asked the judge, being more interested than the others. Malwal answered with pleasure, Haj Redouane al-Taishi. He was the leader of the Arab Janjaweed Muslim Mujahideen who raided the village of Tawila and kidnapped my Dinka bride, Ayan Majak, killed her family members and other villagers, stole girls and livestock, and brought them to the place where they met the Hambadi bandit Wad Mahira bint Aboud. He stole their captive Dinka girls, plundered the cattle and their horses, and killed 10 of them. How did you know that? The judge felt that something else big was about to happen. My wife, Olivia, and I recently chased him from another Dinka village and arrested one of his men. That captured Arab man told us about him and what happened to the captive Ayan and the other kidnapped Dinka girls. If the judge and jury don't believe me, then my two wives Ayan and Olivia will expose him. The judge was not surprised that Malwal claimed to have two wives, as he himself, as a Muslim man, had 3 wives in his family at the same time. But he became extremely interested in the new developments in the case. Accordingly, he took his gavel, hit his table, and announced the issuance of an arrest warrant order for the immediate detention of Haj Radwan al-Taishi, and considered the trial postponed until the next session. Then he took his gavel and hit his table again and shouted, "The court has been postponed." Chapter 47. The difficult choice for the American groom. The arrest and involvement of the evil Janjaweed leader, Haj Ridwan al-Taishi, in the Imam's enslavement of the kidnapped Dinka bride, caused a great uproar in the city, and the news spread everywhere until it crossed the borders of Sudan, into the country of Chad, neighboring the Darfur region. He was arrested on serious charges such as armed invasion, raid, murder, gang rape, forced deportation, and slavery. The crime of slavery committed by the Imam began to seem like nothing compared to those heinous crimes committed by the wealthy Arab man, Haj Radwan al-Taishi. This time, the court scheduled the hearing on a public holiday on Friday and reserved the city's largest hall for the historic trial. Surprisingly, slavery did not become a genuine issue for the court until the Dinka groom Malwal mentioned Haj Radwan and dragged him into it. Before that, the public viewed Malana's crime as merely sexual exploitation of a beautiful young southern girl. What Imam Abdul Razak did is a common racist practice in Sudan. For example, Eritrean refugee girls in the eastern province of the cities of Kassala and Gadaref and the capital city of Sudan, Khartoum, face more serious sexual harassment and abuse than Ikalas faced in the home of the adulterous Imam, Sheikh Abdul Razak al-Mahdi. What made Malana's case more serious was his appeal to the religious authority to justify his possession of a female slave. Haj Radwan's case is considered serious because he trades in people just as a merchant trades in goods. For many years, the Arab Janjaweed have been raiding southern villages to capture women and children, bringing them to work in their homes and fields, and herding their livestock without pay. Then they started selling these girls to Bint al-Zubair Pasha as prostitutes or slave captives in war. ISIS terrorist mujahideen in Syria and Iraq did the same evil to the Yazidi girls and sold them in the slave market in the city of Mosul. They provided religious justifications for their evil actions from the Holy Quran and authentic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad to show that the final messenger of Allah and his companions did the same thing with the captive women and children of those infidels who invaded their lands and defeated them, whether they were polytheists, Jews, Christians, Persians, or Hindus. Throughout the long history of Islam, Islamic mujahideen fighters have invaded, enslaved, raped, and sold female captives from so-called impure infidels who were supposedly enemies of God and his infallible messenger Muhammad bin Abdullah bin Kilab. Some people of the Darfur region considered that the crimes of Haj Radwan exceeded the crimes of the great Sudanese Muslim Sultan Ali Dinar. Actually, the people of Darfur exaggerated their claims because the crimes of Sultan Ali Dinar can only be compared to the heinous crimes of genocide committed by the tyrant Adolf Hitler and his evil Nazi German soldiers. Although Sultan Ali Dinar lived a century ago, some Sudanese tribes hide from him until today on the top of Jebel Mara. He was the most evil and genocidal man to ever walk the surface of planet Earth. Half of the tribes of Darfur, Kordofan, and the Nuba Mountains were killed by his evil Muslim mujahideen invaders. However, he was a deeply religious Muslim man, and every year he sent the holy coverings to the Black Kaaba in the holy city of Mecca. Legend has it that he used hot chili powder as eyeliner kohl on his eyes. No one was allowed to look at his terrifying face due to the red mascara on his sparks-flying eyes. Therefore, he killed anyone who looked into his red eyes, from which sparks of flames flew, as if he were a fire-breathing human dragon. In any case, the story of Haj Radwan's arrest was colored and changed as it passed from one mouth to another before he was brought to the courtroom. By the time of his trial, a few weeks later, his case had developed into an incredibly terrible story. Everyone believes that he amassed all his vast wealth through the slave trade. Every year, he goes with his militiamen to the south and captures thousands of young Christian women and brings them to the western region and sells those southern girls to the rich. Due to their outstanding beauty, the Dinka girl Iqalaz was sold to Imam Abdulrazak al-Mahdi, the Azanda girl Olivia to Bint al-Zubair Pasha, and the Shuluk girl Ayan to the late Hambadi man Wad Mahira bint Aboud. The trial grew to include not only Malwal's two wives Olivia and Iqalaz, but also a third beautiful southern girl called Ayan. So, on the appointed day, many young men came to the court to see the three Christian beauties, Olivia, Iqalaz, and Ayan. People thought that Iqalaz and Ayan were the names of two different beautiful girls. In the 2 weeks leading up to the trial of Haj Redouane Taishi, Malwal, Ayan, and Olivia have to deal with their own serious dilemma. On the day, the American groom found his kidnapped Dinka bride who had been missing for more than a year. The girl freed from slavery and sexual exploitation followed her Christian lawyer out of the courtroom with eyes full of tears and a bleeding heart. In front of Mr. Akal, his wife, Mary, and Mrs. Olivia, Ayan Majok fell to her knees and cried like a child when she met her Dinka husband, Malwal Deng. She thanked heaven and earth for her mercy and for bringing her husband from America to save her from the fangs of the predatory wolf who disguised himself as a good citizen and the imam of the biggest mosque in town. When Ayan met her Dinka husband, only then did her American groom, Malwal, begin to think about the inevitable bitter consequences. He could not imagine, even for a moment, separating himself from his beloved Azanda bride, Olivia, who by that time had come to mean everything to him. At the same time, his sacred Christian marriage vow and commitment to his family and community do not allow him to abandon his Dinka bride, Ayan, after he finds her. Therefore, he found himself in a dilemma that he could not solve on his own. It was Olivia who broached the subject at the hotel when the newlywed lovers returned from the home of the southern lawyer Mr. Akal. "I know what's bothering you, Malwal," Olivia said to him sadly. Her lover and groom could not respond to her words. "I was disturbed by that too, since I recognized your missing Dinka bride, Ayan, inside the courtroom. Appropriate and correct what you should do. I have already thought of a solution. Don't ever think about leaving me or imagine that I will leave you one day," Malwal shouted. Olivia put her hand on her lover's shoulder. "I know, my dear Malwal, you love me, and I love you too. But your duty as a good Christian husband requires you to take your first wife, Ayan, and return to your new homeland, America. She has no one to take care of her if she leaves her. As for me, I have parents, living siblings, relatives, friends, and a home in the South. I have a school education and long practical experience in the nursing profession. I worked as a nurse at Juba General Hospital, the largest hospital in the South. So, I can take care of myself, but the Dinka girl Ayan has none of these qualifications. Moreover, she has an exceedingly small baby girl Sakina who needs shelter and a stepfather as well to adopt her as his stepdaughter." Malwal's face wrinkled, and he replied, "Everything you said may seem true, but still, I can never leave you. I love you so much, Olivia." He added in a softer whisper, as if he were afraid that someone would hear his words, "And I don't love Ayan. You know this fact. Otherwise, neither of us would have fallen in love with the other." That night, neither the Azanda bride, Olivia, nor the Dinka groom, Malwal, could sleep or close their eyes and continued discussing their dilemma until the morning. At the end of their discussion, after exchanging thousands of words and crying a flood of tears, the beloved Azanda girl was able to convince her Dinka lover to leave her and go with his first wife, Ayan, to the United States of America in the New World and live together happily ever after and give birth to sons and daughters. When Malwal finally accepted the difficult choice, Olivia moved out of their shared bed. She said their separation should begin immediately. Malwal rejected such an immediate separation and preferred a gradual severing of their intimate souls. First, they had to separate the beds they were sleeping in, then rooms, houses, and finally, they had to live in two separate countries, Sudan and America. Once she convinced her lover, Olivia approached the freed Dinka girl and begged her to stay with her holy Christian husband. Ayan also showed some resistance and innocently suggested that the two of them share Malwal as a polygamous husband as Muslim women do. Olivia strongly rejected this idea, insisting that the bride, Ayan, and her groom, Malwal, live together as husband and wife. She also reminded Ayan that they are Christians and there is no room for polygamy in Christianity. When the new arrangement was finally imposed on husband Malwal, Olivia sent him to stay with his first wife at Mr. Akal's house. One day before the final session of the trial, the newly reunited bride and groom, Ayan and Malwal, spent their first wedding night and had sex together. It was a wonderful night for the Dinka bride, Ayan, but the American groom, Malwal, felt as if his soul had been split in two. One remained with Olivia and the other united with Ikhlas. He understood that polygamy in Islam is not a heinous crime against the first wife, but rather separation and painful torment for the husband himself. It's hard to describe the pain Olivia went through during her first night in the hotel room without Malwal. The next morning, before they went to court, the American groom Malwal called the Sudanese priest and the president of the Sudanese Association in the USA and told them the good news. He promised to return to his new homeland soon, America, with his newly found bride, Ayan, whom he got after a bloody fight against evil monsters called the Arab Muslim Mujahideen Janjaweed. He did not reveal to them over the phone any details about how and where he found his missing Dinka bride Ayan Majak. Chapter 48. Final ruling of the Criminal Court on Slavery. Never before has the criminal court in the city of El Fasher become so crowded with people, as happened on the day that the evil slave trader Haj Radwan al-Taishi was brought to justice. He is accused of committing serious crimes, such as invasion, raiding, armed robbery, murder, kidnapping, plundering, arson, destruction, rape, infanticide, genocide, and slavery in its various forms, such as owning slave farms, kidnapping African young women, enslaving them, and selling them in secret slave markets to Arabs and brothels for the daughter of Al-Zubair Pasha. It is worth mentioning and repeating that some African residents of the provinces of Darfur and Kordofan and the citizens of the 99 Nuba Mountains believe that the serious and brutal crimes committed by the wealthy man, Haj Radwan, even outweigh the evils of the Sultan Ali Dinar of Darfur state. Of course, as we said before, the people of Darfur, Kordofan, and the Nuba Mountains exaggerated the comparison because the devil Satan Ali Dinar cannot be compared to anyone except perhaps the most evil tyrant in the history of mankind, Adolf Hitler. According to a recent report, there are still people living on the top of the lofty mountain, that is, Jebel Mara, because they are afraid to descend for fear of the evil Muslim Sultan Ali Dinar, who died a century ago, and the earthworms ate the remains of his impure bones. The government and police in Darfur tried several times to convince them of his death and the descent of his evil spirit into hell, but none of them believed the news. They said they could believe the devil was dead, but not the genocidal monster. Some of them went on record by saying, even if God died, the Antichrist, who is Satan incarnated as the evil Muslim Sultan Ali Dinar, could never die. For them, he appears as the accursed devil who removes the affliction of the Holy Quran on their innocent ancestors. The horrific stories they hear in their homes from their grandmothers, in sermons in the mosques of their imams, and on television and radio from their religious leaders and teachers in schools, have convinced them beyond any doubt that Ali Dinar is an eternal God just like Allah. He has both divine and devilish qualities. He was a pious Muslim man who used to send the sacred coverings of the holy Black Kaaba annually, and was Satan who killed thousands of innocent people every year. So, he was three in one, a human, a devil, and a god. He was the evil and impure Trinity. Therefore, he is more evil than Satan and stronger than God. Some religious scholars and imams of mosques in El Fasher city did not condemn Haj Radwan al-Taishi for his practice of raiding the cities and villages of the Christian infidels, because the Prophet Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, was an invader and conqueror who, along with his Mujahideen companions, launched raids against the immoral infidels, killing men, captivating women, and sleeping with captives or their female slaves, prisoners of war without marriage as right-hand possession jari. And all his blessed companions, followers, and followers of the followers continued to invade countries, tribes, and other nations after him until Islam spread throughout the world through jihad for the sake of God by the tip of the sword until they reached Spain in the west and India in the east. Therefore, raiding the cities and villages of the southern Christian infidels is a good prophetic sunnah, and therefore it is not permissible to condemn the ardent Muslim leader Hajj Radwan for commemorating this blessed sunnah. Invasion of the infidel countries is called in Islam jihad al-talb and compulsory obligation for every Muslim man until the Day of Judgment. The Prophet Muhammad said whoever doesn't carry out jihad against infidels for spreading the light of Islam or doesn't tell other Muslims of their duty for jihad dies as an infidel hypocrite. In his authentic hadiths, the Prophet Muhammad also recommended killing the infidel men of the defeated country or tribe if they refuse to convert to Islam, enslaving their women and children, and having sex with their free women without marrying them. Since the Prophet practiced invading, conquering, enslaving, and having sex with infidel women, Hajj Ridwan al-Taishi cannot be convicted of conquering and enslaving infidel Christian Dinka women as well. By convicting him, the criminal court in the city of El-Fasher has indirectly condemned the Holy Prophet Muhammad and the obligation of jihad in Islam, the religion of peace, and all Muslims. For the Sudanese people, slavery has always been defined as the practice through which enslaved people are sold into the slave markets, just as livestock and goods. Therefore, the evil invading practices and enslavement practiced by the Arab Muslims are not considered slavery. Every year, Muslim Janjaweed militiamen attack villages in South Sudan and Darfur, killing men, burning huts, stealing livestock and property, tying up women and children, taking them as captives, and forcing them to work in houses and farms without pay. Rape girls, torture children, and force them to convert to Islam. However, all of this is not considered slavery. When Imam Abdulrazak al-Mahdi shouted from the rooftops that he had a Christian slave girl, he converted her to Islam and impregnated her outside of marriage. Hajj Radwan al-Taishi also stole Dinka girls from the south and sold them to the daughter of Zubair Pasha. The public protested, and the law intervened. In any case, the trial began with the reading of the formal accusation that included the crimes of the third accused slave trader, Hajj Radwan. He is accused of invasion, armed robbery, murder, rape, and slavery. His lawyer immediately responded to these accusations. The new lawyer, who is also an Arab Muslim, like the two lawyers of the Imam Abdul Razak al-Muhyadi and Bint al-Zubair al-Basha, said, "Your Honor, the judge, and the honorable jurymen, everything stated in the formal accusation against my client, the accused, Hajj Radwan al-Taishi, is incorrect. My client has vehemently denied these accusations and insisted that he has never visited South Sudan in his entire life. Moreover, he did not see the young Dinka man, Malwal, who he claimed fought against him and killed some of his men, nor the Dinka girl, Ikhlas, who mentioned in her statements that some Muslim Arab Janjaweed attacked her village, Tawila, killed her people and brought her by force to the city. Then she was sold as a slave or a captive prisoner of war." Malwal said in his testimony that he arrested one of Hajj Radwan's men. That captive man mentioned my client's name and that he was the leader of the raid on one of the Dinka villages. When the police asked him to show them that captured Arab man, he said that the late Al-Hambadi man Wad Mahira bint Aboud killed him. I do not believe that this criminal court can accept the words of a southern Christian citizen and convict an innocent and righteous Arab Muslim citizen like my client, Hajj Radwan al-Taishi. So how do we accept the testimony of two Christians against Muslim men, such as the Imam of the greatest mosque, the Honorable Maulana Abdulrazak al-Mahdi, the wealthy businessman Hajj Ridwan al-Taishi, and the late, greatest Hambadi man of all time, the grandson of Mahira bint Aboud, the mother of our Sudanese Muslim nation? Objection, Your Honor, shouted Mr. Akal. On what basis is your objection? Asked the judge. We have not only Malwal statements, but also the testimony of his second wife, Olivia, and now his first wife, Ayan, who also identified Hajj Redouane Al-Taishi as the criminal leader of the Arab Janjaweed invasion who came to her village, Tawila, and committed the most heinous crimes against her people. These are the atrocities she saw committed against her family and other Dinka people. She was captured, and other girls from the Dinka tribe were captured on the basis that they became captives of war, which Islam allows for Muslim invaders of the lands of Christians who are considered impure infidels. Then Hajj Radwan brought her as a captive slave girl to the Darfur province until the bandit man Wad Mahira bint Aboud took her from him by force. The defense lawyer said, "Well, if my Muslim client had stolen the Christian girl Iqlaz from a Dinka village, why did she run away from him to the house of Bint al-Zubair Pasha?" According to Bint al-Zubair Pasha's statement to the police, Iqlaz entered her huts one day and asked to work as a paid maid. No one ever claimed to have seen her in the hands of Hajj Radwan. The court has no evidence to prove that my client took the Dinka girl Ayan Majak from the south. The court also has no evidence that my client sold the girl as a prisoner of war to Bint al-Zubair. The court cannot convict my client based on the words of 3 Southern Christians. Firstly, the Southern girl, Iqlaz, was not a slave, but rather a paid blackmailer, hired to carry out an illegal act against one of the righteous saints, Imam Abd al-Razak. Secondly, Malwal and Olivia had not met Hajj Redouane face-to-face before today. Accordingly, I ask this esteemed court to drop these false accusations against my defendant, Hajj Redouane Al-Taishi. After Hajj Radwan's lawyer returned to his seat, Bint al-Zubair Pasha's lawyer came forward. He did not add anything new except that he confirmed what the first lawyer said, that the Southern girl, Iqlaz, came to Bint al-Zubair's huts of her own free will and was therefore not a captive slave who was sold to her by the late al-Hambadi man, Wad Mahira. In addition, he rejected the accusation that Bint al-Zubair had commercial connections in practicing slavery with the late bandit man Wad Mahira bint Aboud and Hajj Radwan Al-Taishi. He challenged Bint al-Zubair's confession of sending Iqlaz to Malana's house to seduce him, entice him into adultery, and impregnate her outside Islamic marriage bond. The Imam proved to this court by presenting a legal marriage contract that he married her according to the holy book of God, the Quran, and the blessed Sunnah of his infallible Prophet Muhammad, and she is still his legal Muslim wife. And she became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter as his lawful spouse, not his slave girl. Such a false confession by Bint al-Zubair Pasha must have been placed in her bleeding mouth under torture by the police interrogators during their harsh interrogation with batons. The Dinka girl, Iqlaz, said in her confessions that she left the huts of Bint al-Zubair and joined the Imam's house as a paid maidservant of her own free will. She admitted, biting her tongue, that she had used a fraudulent Southern man named Abdullah Deng to deceive the holy Imam Abdul Razak and his virtuous wife until she was hired as a paid maid. For these reasons, the lawyer also asked the court to lift the false charges of sexual blackmail and adultery against his client, the chaste and honorable woman, Bint al-Zubair Pasha. The Southern lawyer, Mr. Akal, was then given the opportunity to question the 3 suspects or refute the defense and arguments of their 3 Muslim lawyers. The Christian lawyer tried in every feasible way to refute their defense, but he could not. He was unable to successfully establish links in the practice of slavery, blackmail, and adultery between Hajj Radwan Al-Hambadi, Wad Mahira bint Aboud, Bint al-Zubair Pasha, and Imam Abdul Razak. The murder of the evil bandit man, Wad Mahira bint Aboud, at the hands of the brave Azanda girl, Olivia, the so-called Jamal, who had uncircumcised pussy, made it difficult for the Southern lawyer to prove that he was the one who stole the Dinka captive girl, Ayan alias Iqlaz, from Hajj Radwan and sold her as a sex slave to Bint al-Zubair Pasha. He tried to convince the court that these 4 people worked together in the slave trade. Unfortunately, the court found that his arguments did not support the statements of Iqlaz, Malwal, and Olivia. Accordingly, the criminal court acquitted the 3 defendants of all charges, especially charges of slavery, extortion, and adultery. Rumors spread among the African Shemashas who were angry at the court's unfair ruling, but their authenticity cannot be proven or denied. that the wealthy man Haj Radwan, the rich lady pimp Bint al-Zubair Pasha, and the parliamentary representative Syed al-Saab, son-in-law of Imam Abd al-Razak, had met before the trial and agreed to pay huge bribes to the main judge and the court jurors. When the cash reached the hands of these Arab Muslim judges, serious charges were dropped, and the 3 Muslim perpetrators were acquitted of their heinous crimes in honor with their heads held up high. Chapter 49. Satanic Rituals After the Trial of Slavery. The release of Imam Abdulrazak al-Mahdi was met with joyful celebration by his son-in-law, his 3 wives, their sons, daughters, grandchildren, relatives, friends, and worshippers at the Grand Mosque, which was the biggest house of God in the city of El-Fasher. The celebration took place as soon as the so-called innocent virtuous imam stepped out of the courtroom. Mr. Al-Saab slaughtered 7 lambs, 6 sheep, 5 calves, 4 cows, 3 camels, and countless chickens and pigeons as an honor to God by releasing his so-called innocent father-in-law from charges of slavery and adultery, with his head held high. As soon as the adulterous imam left the courtroom, Mr. Al-Saab began screaming with joy and firing live bullets into the air. After every few steps the imam took, he would jump over an animal slaughtered as an offering to God. It is customary in Sudan for a sick individual, a person who has survived a fatal traffic accident, or who has been acquitted of a serious felony charge. His family should sacrifice animal offerings as an offering to God and his noble messenger Muhammad. By jumping over the sacrifice, the person is expected to break the curse that brought him trouble and almost claim his precious life and become known to everyone. Some women were constantly shouting, ululations of joy or shouts of happiness. The courtyard outside the courtroom has turned into a place for fun, dancing, and singing. The young women carry tambourines and drums and play with them, and everyone dances and has fun and joy. Some famous Sudanese female singers, known as Qunat or goalkeepers, were contracted to come with their big drums, play them, and sing vulgar songs during the celebration of Nasrallah and the triumphal release of the living saint and righteous Imam. Even the Noba dervish men came with their huge drums and began beating them with large sticks and shouting with one voice in complete unison, Allah, Allah, the ever-living, the self-subsisting, without stopping. Some became ascetic devotees and began performing swirling dances and powerful chanting as acts of ecstatic devotion. These whirling dervishes had an abundance of frenzied energy as they danced, shook, screamed, and were extremely angry as if they were possessed by demons of rage or in epileptic fits. Some Sufi groups came with huge drums and began dancing and shouting in unison, Allah Akbar, God is great, God is the ever-living, the eternal, who will take neither a nap nor sleep. There are many weird religious behaviors that occur within the vast land in front of the criminal court in El-Fasher. Mr. Al-Saab called on every worshipper, friend, or foe to come to the Grand Mosque to enjoy a free meal. It happened to be an official holiday, meaning Holy Friday, and it was the day on which the blessed Imam was acquitted of the charges of slavery and adultery. He is expected to deliver a passionate sermon in his largest mosque during the communal public Friday prayer. In addition, regular worshippers and non-worshippers were promised free delicious food after noon prayers. The spacious hall of the mosque was filled to capacity with Muslim believers, and some of them even stood in the 4 streets surrounding it to perform the general Friday prayer and thank God for the victory and great relief. Some of the participants in the collective prayer had never gone to a mosque before, and some of them had never prayed or fasted in their lives and did not know how to perform ablution before that historic day. Even non-Muslims, such as Christians and pagan African polytheists who worship the gods of Qujur and the spirits of their dead ancestors, entered the mosque on that day to pray to and thank God for the victorious release of the so-called innocent lamb Abdul Satan al-Mahdi. The blessed Imam led the large crowd in a short 7-minute prayer and spent an hour and a half delivering the Friday sermon. In his sermon, he attacked the government, the Southern Christians, the Nuba and Fur Africans, the Masalit and Zaghawa tribes, and everyone who is not Arab. He said that Sudan needs ethnic cleansing of the enemies of God and his messenger who hate the truth of Islam. He even referred to some officials in the local government of El Fasher by name. He described the mayor as an atheist and a red communist. His fiery sermon filled the audience with intense enthusiasm for the truth of Islam and hatred towards the so-called enemies of Allah and his prophet Muhammad. He said that God will complete his light, even if the unbelievers hate it. After every sentence spoken by the Honorable Imam, the crowd chanted, Allahu Akbar, or God is greater than all the pagan gods worshipped by infidels. Often, the difficult master initiates shouting. Mr. Al-Sab, the terrorist son-in-law of the Satan Maulana, shouts every now and then, Allahu Akbar. The crowd then chants, God is great. Talil, shouts Mr. Hard. God is great. The crowd thunders. Dangerous satanic rituals are about to take place after the Imam's fiery sermon because the phrase Allahu Akbar, or God is great, does not only mean God is greater than all gods for a Muslim. It is a war cry that Muslim mujahideen fighters must utter before they can attack their enemies. For a Muslim, every person who does not believe in his religion is an infidel and needs to be forced to convert to Islam by force, willingly or unwillingly. If the infidel refuses to accept Islam, he must be slaughtered like a sheep, and his money, livestock, women, and children must be taken as spoils of war for the Muslim mujahideen. This teaching was mentioned in the Holy Quran in Surat Al-Tawbah number 9, verse 5 and verse 29, known as Surah Bara. It is the last surah revealed in the Quran, and it contains the notorious verse of the sword that allows Muslims to spread Islam by force and kill anyone who refuses to accept their religion. Therefore, the more the war cry, Allahu Akbar, is repeated before an attack, the more enthusiasm will grip the hearts of the Muslim mujahideen or holy fighters against the infidels or the enemies of God Allah, His Messenger Muhammad, and the Muslims. So, if a crowd of Muslims chants this phrase passionately, trouble is likely to follow. That afternoon, the Imam incited the anger of the crowd against some African tribes that he called enemies of God, namely the Dinka, Nuba, Fur, Zaghawa, Masalit, and other African and southern tribes. The Imam's son-in-law, Sayyid al-Sab, filled the hearts of large crowds with war cries of Allahu Akbar and Talil, and God is great and praise Allah, until their chests could no longer contain them. The crowd became like a volcano about to erupt, waiting for any small crack to erupt out and spew its vomit and molten lava and spread throughout the city like wildfire. That great explosion began with a satanic fatwa issued by the Imam himself when he ended his sermon by interpreting a verse from the Quran. The Imam shouted from the top of his pulpit, God has said, we have made the Dinka and the Nuba people as a livelihood for you. In other words, he said that God had authorized the mob to kill the Dinka and Nuba tribes and seize their women, children, livestock, and other property as their halal livelihood. Thus, the brutal massacre began inside the courtyard of the Great Mosque itself. Angry Arab crowds began killing every citizen they considered African, Southern, and Zanji or Negro. Therefore, the collective prayer followed by the sermon is the beginning of the satanic rituals. The black-skinned African victims ran for their lives in chaos. Many of them were trapped inside the mosque and slaughtered like sacrificial animals. By the time the police officers and military soldiers arrived, the massacre had spread to many African homes in the city. The houses of Southerners, Nuba, and Fur tribes were stormed and looted by the so-called black Arabs in the Darfur region, Misriya, Rizgat, and Bakara. The wives, mothers, sisters, and daughters of Africans were gang-raped, and their men and children were brutally murdered. Police authorities and heavily armed military soldiers were unable to control the turmoil and massacre in the city until the next morning. By then, the number of victims would be countless. A rumor spread that police and army soldiers, mostly Muslim Arabs, had joined in the genocide and shot many Southerners, Nuba, Fur, Zaghawa, and Masalit, and participated in the gang rape of their women. The only house of the Southerners that was not affected due to the heavy security was the house of the African lawyer, Mr. Akal. Fortunately, the intelligent Christian lawyer anticipated the eruption and massacre, so he took the freed Dinka girl, Ayan, her American husband, Malwal, and the Azanda girl, Olivia, to his heavily guarded residence in time before Arab hands reached them. Chapter 50. The departure of the rebel fighter, Olivia. The city took a week to return to normal life. The central government in Khartoum intervened during this week and implemented some important administrative measures to solve the problem of El Fasher city. The entire administrative body of the city's local government was reshuffled. The atheist mayor was transferred to a remote city in the northern region of Sudan called Dongola, and he was replaced by an Arab man from the terrorist Muslim Brotherhood in the capital city. The judge of the criminal court and the jurymen were transported and distributed throughout the country. Even the Christian lawyer, Mr. Akal, received notice of transfer to Khartoum City within a month. Despite this, armed policemen with their police dogs continued to guard his house until the day came when he and his family were taken to the railway station and exiled from the city of El Fasher and expelled from the Darfur region forever. Meanwhile, freed slave girl Ayan Majak, her infant daughter Sakina bint Al-Qatham, or daughter of the black slave, and her American husband, Mal Waldang, continue to live in Mr. Akal's house until security is fully restored in the city. Then they can be sent under police protection to wherever they want to go. The Azanda girl Olivia also hid in the same guarded house of the smart African lawyer and waited for the right time to escape the north and return to her family in the south. As for the adulterous imam and his satanic fatwa, he was considered infallible, or a righteous man of God who had no mistakes in his decision. This conclusion is based on the Sharia law that stated, if a religious leader or imam of the Islamic nation issues a fatwa, he must receive 2 rewards from God if he is correct in his fatwa and 1 reward if he makes a mistake in his decree. Accordingly, whoever loves the imam of the largest mosque in the city believes that he has received 2 rewards from God for his satanic fatwa, and whoever does not love him believes that he has received 1 reward for his incitement to kill Southern, Fur, and Nuba tribes and rob them of their property, and his instigation of Arabs of raping black-skinned African women. As for those who hate him, and there are many, his entire life is a fulfillment of the prophecy of the coming Antichrist. The police authorities were unable to arrest him because his brother-in-law, a member of parliament in the central government in Khartoum, Mr. Al-Sab, intervened and blamed the massacre on ignorant Arab worshippers who misunderstood the meaning of the satanic fatwa revealed by God from the zodiac sky to his righteous imam. The city was placed under full curfew before the unrest and turmoil were over. At least the American groom, Malwal, was able to rescue his kidnapped Dinka bride, Ayan, from the hands of those who enslaved and abused her, despite the bloody fighting. Even the Christian lawyer, Mr. Akal, considered this a real victory, despite his loss of the case. It is seen as a true blessing from heaven that nothing bad happened to the 3 Southern friends Ayan, Malwal, and Olivia during Black Friday. The 3 friends planned to escape the city as soon as they got the green light from the police authority to leave. The American husband was able to obtain a plane ticket for his Dinka wife, which was supposed to take her to the United States more than a year ago. Fortunately, the airline reissued it. He still has his return ticket, so it's only a matter of time before he and his first wife, Ayan, can travel to America via Nairobi, Kenya. His missing bride, who was miraculously found, can get her Sudanese passport reissued in Juba City. As for his Azanda lover, Olivia, she booked herself a ticket to sail on a ship from the city of Kosti to South Sudan. Another sad event marred their departure. The Sharia law did not allow Iqalaz to claim custody of her daughter Sakina from the imam who fathered her child outside the bond of Islamic marriage. This is because Islamic law gives custody of children to their Muslim father. Therefore, her child, Sakina, was taken from her by 3 female police officers and transferred to her biological father, His Eminence Imam Abdul Razak al-Mahdi. The Southern Christian lawyer advised the grieving Dinka mother, Ayan, not to try to enter into another legal battle with that dangerous Muslim imam. Mr. Akal based his advice on his knowledge of Islamic Sharia law, which gives custody of children to the father and not to the mother after their separation through divorce. There are only a few days left. A fleeting time for the three Southern friends to say goodbye to the Christian lawyer, Mr. Ackall, his family, and each other, and part forever. Beloved Malwal wishes in his heart that those few days could be extended for a few years. He wants his Azanda lover, Olivia, to stay with him and his Dinka wife, Ayan, for the rest of their lives. For this reason, the couple planned to travel the day before Olivia left for Kosti. But the beautiful Azanda girl decided to surprise the Dinka couple and leave before the appointed day. She does not want her wife Ayan to feel that her husband Malwal is still attached to her as his second wife or that he loves her more than his first wife. 3 days before their scheduled trip, Malwal got up from sleep, went as usual to Olivia's room, and knocked on her door. He knows she's an early riser, but he's surprised when she doesn't respond to his knocks. He longed to see her and talk to her that morning. He understood that their days with each other could be counted on the fingers of one hand. If he could, he would have convinced his wife Ayan to let his beloved Olivia share their bed at night. When there was no answer, Malwal dragged his feet and crept away from her room. He turned and looked again at her door, hoping she would come and open it for him. The vision was clearly obscured by his heavy tears. How he wishes for their happy days to come back so that he can enjoy those wonderful days with his beloved Olivia, which they spent almost naked like Tarzan and Tarzan in the jungle, or their wonderful honeymoon in Jebel Mara. He wished he had met the Azanda girl before he married the Dinka girl. But he knows that it is just a dreaming among the seventh impossibility, because even God cannot change the events of what man did in his past times. Somehow, Malwal managed to reach the living room, where he found Mr. Ackall sitting alone, reading his morning newspaper. His wife, Ayan, and wife, Mary, are busy in the kitchen preparing breakfast for everyone. Malwal also picked up another newspaper and sat down trying to read it, but his tears obscured his vision. He put the newspaper down, buried his head in his arms, and began to weep silently for his dear friend Olivia, who would soon be leaving them. While he was weeping, he felt someone standing in front of him. His nose could smell the good perfume that Olivia always loved to put on her sexy body. His exhausted soul was instantly revived, and he felt as if someone had reached deep into his heart and filled his soul with joy. He raised his head, opened his eyes, and looked at his beloved friend, Olivia, standing in front of him. His instinctive reaction was to take her in his arms and kiss her on her sweet lips. However, he recalled that she suggested that they avoid any physical contact from the day they agreed to separate permanently from each other inside the hotel room. Instead, Malwal immediately rose to his feet. Then he whispered happily, "Why did you wake up so late today, my dear?" Instead of hearing the sweet voice of his beloved Olivia, Malwal heard the hoarse voice of a man answering his question. He shook his head to make sure he wasn't hallucinating or daydreaming. He was sure that his nose had smelled her sweet perfume, that his eyes had seen Olivia's beautiful face, and that he was about to touch her tender body with his hands. Like a mirage, the beautiful image of his beloved girlfriend mysteriously transformed into a tall Dinka man, even taller than him. He's the Christian lawyer. This letter and this package from Miss Olivia to you. Mr. Ackall repeated his words 3 times before Malwal heard and understood them. He received the letter and package with trembling hands and waited for an explanation. Why would Olivia give him a letter and package through Mr. Ackall? Why didn't she hand them over to him personally? Lawyer Ackall said politely, "The Azanda girl Olivia left last night and deposited these things with me so that I can deliver them to you personally." Malwal stood as silent as a statue and continued to stare in amazement at Mr. Ackall's face. She said she was going to take the express bus to Kosti City last night. She planned to board her ship to Juba City early this morning. Malwal's eyes filled with tears as he stood there without uttering a single word. To clarify the matter further, Mr. Ackall said a final sentence before returning to his chair and continuing to read his newspaper. Now her ship may have already left the port of Kosti and headed towards the city of Juba. It would be impossible for anyone to convey in words the sadness that filled Malwal's heart after he learned that his beloved Olivia had already left him and was gone forever. It would be unfair to say that the abandoned lover, Malwal, felt the same pain that any other lover would feel when his beloved suddenly leaves him. No matter how long the separation between them lasts, the lover may always long to see his beloved one day. Even a lover whose beloved girlfriend has died may dream of seeing her in heaven or in another world. But for the jilted Dinka lover, there is no such thing to hope for. His Azanda lover was gone forever, taking with her all hope, as if she had vanished from existence like a mirage, leaving behind a barren desert that God could never recreate again. There is no possibility now of building a bridge in the world of imagination or dreams that could connect him to her. The few sentences she wrote with her fingertips in her final letter revealed that their separation was forever. Below is her last message to her beloved friend, without additions, deletions, or modifications. A good soldier must leave as soon as the battle is over. Those for whom the battle was fought must reap the fruits of victory. Yes, I was born to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Maybe one day, in a remote corner of the jungle, I will lay down my weapon and die alone. Goodbye, my friend, Soldier Malwal. / your fellow rebel soldier, Olivia Thomas. Those few words flew like poisoned arrows and entered her lover's heart. He sank into a deep abyss of sadness. He wept silently all day, trying to hide his heart condition from his Dinka wife. Ayan knows that it was Olivia who sacrificed her love for Malwal on her behalf because she wanted her to have a good and safe life. So, that morning, Ikalaz also cried silently because Olivia was gone. Somehow the hours of that day passed, and the lover remained in a state of deep mourning for his beloved, who had passed away and left him forever. No human language can describe the great sadness that continued to eat away at his heart like a cancer.